Ready? Okay, let me see, 710. Hi, you guys. Welcome back to Lost Arts Radio Live. This is Richard Sachs, your host, and this is a show for Saturday, May 25th, 2019. Except for one thing, we're not live. We're recorded back on Wednesday because this time Doug couldn't be here. Last week I couldn't. And so we're putting it up at about the same time, but we're having to pre-record it. So I don't know what the news for the rest of the week is going to be. My foresight of predicting things in advance is not that great. So I was thinking of what I might be able to share with you this week, since we don't have up to the minute news. And for that, I still think that looking at Alex's show is a good way to catch up on that kind of stuff. And I take a chance every time I mention it, even his first name, because anybody that mentions him is banned now too. But anyway, I thought, what can I share with you that would be valuable without being able to comment on up to the minute news developments through Saturday, which usually is what I try to do. So I thought, well, why don't I share what I did last week and what came out of it, the thing that I wasn't here for, that I had to be at, and that was a graduate school conference event. And it ended with a discussion of world events. I was really kind of shocked that they got into actual real world things that were happening instead of just academic things that didn't relate to it. But they did. And what I got from that meeting with a bunch of students and professors, and I guess I was probably about the oldest person there, just trying to look like a regular student and as normal as possible. And what I got from that was a clear, even clearer view on what's being taught in government educational systems, backed up by major corporate media, of course, which kind of promotes the same sort of thing, and government agencies and their corporate partners and other establishment organizations. And it was really interesting. It was a kind of inside view of how the universities are being used to train everybody now. And along with, as I said, the media and the programmed entertainment and even the programmed music, a lot of the stuff that we're getting. So the reason it matters and that it's important is it explains part of how the public is having their common sense removed surgically. And our ability to see and understand what's right in front of us is being replaced by memorized indoctrination of different kinds. And it's so subtle and professional that most of us don't even realize that it's happening. And making it more conscious would give us a better understanding of the events in the world and what we can do to improve on things that are happening and change the direction. So I noticed while I was at the conference that it wasn't just politically correct thinking, it was emotional training too. And the way you can tell that is once you're indoctrinated in the politically correct thought patterns, that if you hear anything by way of opposing views or anything that is questioning what you've been taught, you just get extremely emotionally upset, and you don't really think about why. You just feel really upset and angry, and it's all masking fear, which is the underlying program that's been used for many thousands of years, still being done very successfully, just with more technology now. And the result is that you can't really seriously consider any thoughts outside of what you've been trained for. And you can see this with these mobs of people running around the street violently. I guess you could call it protesting, but it's not a regular protest. It's more toward the riot, instigation of violence type thing. And a lot of the people in it, they're not very coherent. They can't really talk about what they're doing. They can't talk logically about what they're against in most cases. And they just get really mad. And now they're doing this thing. They're simulating acid attacks on people, made popular by a famous religion, starting with I, all over the world, that this is a way to really show people, I guess, who's who God likes and who God doesn't. But they're doing the junior version of it now all over the country, getting ready for the full version, and they're using milkshakes instead of acid, which I guess it makes it safer because it's legal to carry milkshakes around. I guess it's legal to carry acid around because you could be getting ready to chlorinate your swimming pool, right? So, but the act of throwing a milkshake on somebody is not as serious of a crime as throwing acid on them because of the result, but it's kind of getting people ready for what they're planning to do. And these are completely criminally insane people. They just think that they're not. And a lot of them think they're saving the world from fascism and tyranny and stuff like that. They don't realize that they're the example now of completely out of control insanity. So it makes things pretty interesting. And with the programming that they've got, you can see defensiveness and aggression and sometimes violence taking over instead of coherent arguments. And it's just getting more intense. So views that oppose the politically correct thought get labeled hate speech by the corporate media that backs up these crazy people out in the street. And the universities are like training camps for these people. And I noticed it too. I'm in the middle of the whole university system right now too, and that's connected to the event that I was at last weekend that I was going to share with you. And then hate speech, which is anything that they don't agree with, gets criminalized and gets silenced because of that. And Europe and the UK, or what used to be Europe and the UK, are a little bit ahead of the US, and people are being put in jail there for mentioning anything that you're not supposed to talk about. It's just labeled hate speech, and they have the police come to your house and sometimes arrest you, and it's getting pretty intense. So the process is also underway right now in America, just kind of following in the footsteps of the UK and what used to be Europe and elsewhere too. So I thought it would be kind of fun to share this with you, what I learned last weekend when I was not here. And I had to broadcast the private planetary healing club from a private home of a doctor friend who was down there near the conference, and I got to set it up in that house, and it worked pretty well. So let's see what the correct views and world issues were like at this graduate school conference. And don't worry, we're not going to be talking about anything really controversial here. Just kind of the top 10 issues that everyone agrees on, like censorship, abortion, geoengineering, poisoned food and water, measles outbreaks, forced vaccines, mass shootings, immigration, and the Federal Reserve. That keeps it all in just the normal topics that don't get too far out of the box. And of course, I'm just kidding, but I was actually shocked that there would be any open discussion on these kind of issues. And once the so-called discussion actually started, I became aware of why they felt confident doing it. I mean, I was like a minority of one, some kind of a space alien, with the rest of the crowd taking the other side of virtually every issue. But I did learn a lot. I was really impressed with the almost universal agreement among the students and the professors on just about every one of these issues, all the things we talked about. And as I said, on many of the issues, there was only one person, out of step with the consensus of everybody else. And that was me. That was an interesting experience because it wasn't just an academic disagreement. The training of these students and professors was pretty progressing really well, and I got a lot of hate stares and just total amazement at how could I be, a successful student of all these things and disagree with the approved point of view. And it was like, what? What did you say? And they tried to be polite and scientific about it all, but it was really clear that there's an incredible amount of hypnosis and brainwashing going on. So, okay, let's get started with the first major topic because we're going to run out of time as usual. And I'd say the first one that we could look at would be censorship. And it was almost universally agreed that these were the words they used, to save our democracy. Anytime you hear about our democracy, the person either has no idea what American government is based on or supposed to be based on, or they do have an idea and they're trying to shift, I guess, the Overton window or the common thinking away from a constitutional republic, because that's radically different than a democracy. And the founders of America thought democracy was a terrible form of government. They never wanted it. I forget which one of the founders said that democracies are as violent in their deaths as they were in their life or in their initiation. And that is not what the American government was supposed to be, a democracy. But it's democracy. Actually, it turns out that the reason they don't like it is, especially if you have a crazy population like we're getting now, 51 or more % of the people can vote to do anything they want to the other 49 or less %. So democracy is the way you have no protection for any minority points of view. And I'm not talking about minority skin color, because any racism based on skin color is just, it shows that the people involved in it are totally brain dead, and nobody is racist in the real sense unless they, have basically no intelligence at all. Racism is not as common as what the media wants you to believe, although they're trying to make it common right now. But I'm saying that in a democracy, it's not just that the people of a different skin color have no protection, which they don't, but the people with a different idea are not acceptable. And in classic democracies that in current history started in Greece, I think, many times, I remember reading sometimes they had black stones and white stones for voting yes or no on a certain idea. And if the people with the wrong idea got voted down, sometimes they just all got killed to make things more efficient. That's real democracy. And I don't think we want that. And there's this programming and just memorization that democracy is just really great. No, democracy is horrible, because anything can be voted to happen to you. And a constitutional republic is good, provided that the people who wrote the Constitution were not crazy. And fortunately, in America in the current time, although it's not absolutely perfect and it didn't foresee a lot of the types of insanity that are coming up now, it's amazingly prescient and wise, and it would create a stepped up level of the country and life experience in America or anywhere else that followed it if we really did it. It just has to be brought back. And that's why the censorship is ramping up so fast, is that the people who are in control, who intend destruction, which is really the end game of their agenda, is extermination of life. And that's another long story. It's not just population reduction. It goes beyond that. But the reason they're ramping up the programs of censorship now is that they're just being exposed as completely crazy, so they can't afford to have any real ideas talked about. And one by one, they're being deplatformed and eventually criminalized, and you'll disappear for talking about the wrong thing. I think in California, that's already proposed, if not passed, that if you discuss certain programs such as vaccination and others that you're never supposed to question, that you can be fined or go to jail just for talking about it. And the same thing is happening with certain religions that you cannot mention or talk about or quote their actual scriptures on air, because that, like anything else that they disagree with, is called hate speech, even if it's true. And we talked to one of our guests about that who's really into this topic. And he said, yeah, now they have a different category, because it just is sounding too ridiculous to call quoting things from a scripture honestly as hate speech, because it's not hate speech when the scripture was written, according to the rulers now. It's just hate speech when you mention it. So they said, okay, well, it's not regular hate speech, it's hate facts. Okay, so it's things that are true, and they're valid observations, but because they might make somebody feel bad, they're called hate facts, and you can't say them. And that program is going on, and so the idea is that it's essential to eliminate hate speech, and that's just going to make everybody feel good. It's going to make everything nice, and they'll just, sit around singing Kumbaya and stuff, and everybody will be good friends, and we'll finally have gotten rid of dissension of all kinds. And of course, anti-stress vaccines will play their part in that too, because if parts of your brain are eaten that cause stress, then you'll always be stress-free and everything's going to be wonderful. So what was really interesting is that, I told you that anything that doesn't agree with mainstream kind of communist, fascist, progressive, authoritarian agenda is the hate speech. Basically, in a nutshell, hate speech as defined in our conversations that weekend were everything that I was in favor of. And the weird thing is, wait a minute, I don't hate anybody. Because of the track that I'm going along, I don't even hate the people that are obviously doing the most criminal activity, because I see them as victims of their own programming that have to be helped out of it. I mean, I believe in stopping the criminal activity, as Deborah says on her website, Stop the Crime, but .net, by the way. Hope that I can mention that. But not destroying anybody in doing so unless it's defensive and necessary and unavoidable. But since I don't hate anybody, how come that's called hate speech? So I guess the answer would be never mind about that. Pay no attention to that. In fact, asking that question is also hate speech. So censorship, like we see happening now, is just, not something that you're allowed to really talk about. And what I was really amazed at is that almost everybody in the conference that I was at was in favor of censorship, because, I mean, how could hate speech be acceptable? It's defined as bad, right? No matter what it actually is, which they don't think about very much at all. But they know that it's defined as this kind of buzzword, hate speech, and they don't have to understand it. They just have to know it's bad and it has to be killed. And anybody who says it is evil and has to be taken off, and this has been on mainstream television the last week or two especially, that these roundtable commentary discussions of the really wisest newscasters are saying, yeah, they have to be censored. I think what words were used? Muted, eliminated, silenced, all this stuff. It would have made Stalin really happy. And the German dictator that I don't want to mention it by name unless I have to, because I'll be called whoever, whatever, But those people would have thought this current system is great. And virtually everybody was in agreement. They said people are being allowed to say terrible things. And this was on one of the major news channels too, maybe CNN, that they didn't think that the founding fathers intended for people to say these absolutely terrible things and them travel all around the world with the latest technology and have that allowed. So I think most of the people reading off the teleprompter to give that wise commentary probably don't understand. They're just reading a script to make money. But the ones who write the script in the teleprompters do understand. And they're trying to get everybody trained to jump on the dissenter so they don't have to do it and eliminate what they call the hate speech. Okay, so we could talk the whole time on that. But number 2 out of 10 is another totally non-controversial topic, right? You might have heard of it. It's called abortion. And a lot of it is going on right now. There's a lot of big news about it. 2 governors of Virginia and New York were promoting laws. The one in New York already passed. The one in Virginia is being supported as a bill, which the governor thinks is great. And it's the ability to kill the baby right up until the day it's born on that day. And that's just abortion. It's not anything, to worry about. And the governor of Virginia explained in this new bill, which I think is probably the same according to some of the attorneys I've talked to in New York, that once the baby is born, well, it's still not really a person, right? Everybody knows that. So you can kill it. And one of the nurses said, yeah, you probably just break its neck. And that's the usual protocol. That's the standard of, I guess that's the standard of care in abortion. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's totally acceptable. In fact, there was a panel of bioethicists, the people that decide what's moral and what isn't in medicine, that met in Australia a few years ago. And they said, yeah, these people are right, even though this hadn't happened legally yet. And in fact, they're missing part of the point, because the baby, even after it's born, until it's at least 3, according to the experts, it's not really a person, right? Everybody knows that. So you can abort people up to any reasonable age if it's stressful for the mother, to live with the baby, or any other reason like that. In New York, they call it anything to do with women's health, which means if she's upset by having to have the baby alive, then, they have to take care of that. So what we learned in our conference of the advanced postgraduate people that I was among, being one of them, is that abortion protects women's rights. You have to understand it correctly. It has nothing to do with babies. They're not part of the issue. Suggesting it has anything to do with babies is hate speech, and we learned about that in issue number 1. It's anti-woman to question it, and it's fascist too, if not racist, probably also. And this is an issue on which men should not be listened to at all, and ideally should have no opinion if they're respectful, because they're not even women. So how could they have any idea about what the issue is? And they can talk, but really only to admit that they don't understand it. That would be the best thing. And especially if they have the additional defect, besides being men, which is a defect to begin with, but the additional defect of having light-colored skin, I mean, that really means that they should have no part in the discussion. It's a woman's decision about her own body. Nobody else is involved. Her doctor can suggest an opinion too. The one who's about to perform the abortion can put his or her opinion in there, and that is to be considered as valid. So scientists, even including some men, are confirming that this is an accurate way of assessing this issue, and the bioethicists were like the top level experts who confirm it, and that post-birth abortions are normal. So the New York law, according to the attorneys I talked to, allows abortion after birth with actually no upper age. So if you have a mother who's not totally happy with you, you really should watch out and make sure you're really alone when you think you are, stuff like that, because she's within her rights to take care of her own body by eliminating you. So that was what we learned in that session. And also not just in New York, but the governor in Virginia is on tape, which is all over the internet now, although the major media is totally ignoring it. And he's saying that it's really being blown all out of proportion. This is his words. And that the infant, he forgot to call it a part of the mother's body. He said the infant that is born is kept comfortable. And then, this is real weird medical deception language. He said, if the mother wishes it at some point, the infant can be resuscitated. That's complete backwards, upside down speech. The normal meaning of resuscitated is when somebody's not breathing, you get them breathing again, but clearly the baby's breathing. And if the mother wants, you can resuscitate it. That means it'll allow it to live. Otherwise, you just have to kill it, and that ends the abortion, which, according to many people, is the kindest thing you can do to a part of the mother's body so that she doesn't have any stress. So I hope you're really absorbing all of the wisdom that we learned in this higher education conference. This was real. I'm not making up any of this stuff, although I'm adding in some things from people I talked to separately. Issue number 3, just to make sure we avoid the controversial issues, is geoengineering. And anybody who cares about life what I learned, okay, from the university and the professors and attorneys I talked to who are all completely politically correct. Anybody who cares about life on our planet, number one, should be in total panic about global warming. If you're not a responsible human being. And you should be extremely scared of what is happening and what might happen. So what you need, if you realize you should have been more terrified up to now and you're willing to become terrified and think clearly, what you need to know is five things primarily. One, and I'm just looking down at my notes to make sure I don't miss any of these points. It's a conspiracy theory and doesn't exist. That's the first thing you have to know about it. The second thing is, even though it doesn't exist and no one's talking about it, it is being considered as a solution to global warming that would only kill a minority of the people and other life forms. So, that statistically it's fine, and there's too many life forms in people anyway, so it would be a good idea. But don't forget that it doesn't exist. And then number three is you can have it as a career track where it's already put into academic programs in many universities around the world. And you might want to jump on it now before everybody else gets the best spots in the new professions based on geoengineering. They're not just going to geoengineer the air, they have to geoengineer the oceans and the land and the soil. And it goes right along with the genetic engineering of the life forms, because when God didn't have scientists to call on, then how could he get it right? Obviously he couldn't. And it's a miracle that without GMOs and genetic engineering and geoengineering that we're still alive. But science is coming to the rescue now. And number four is disregard the analyses of the residues that have been picked up and monitored coming out of the planes that are spraying, that are like toxic metals and bio and chemical weapons and things. Don't pay any attention to that. It's a conspiracy theory, and if you get confused about it, go back to number one, and that'll make you feel much better, because that says that it doesn't exist. So hopefully that clarifies the whole issue. I got to start going faster because I'm taking way too long with this stuff. I said I'd get through 10 issues. I'm going to say a lot less on each one, but you're going to get the point how it all goes together in an enlightened, wise worldview that will save the earth from humans and all other bad problems that are threatening our survival right now. Number four is poisoned food. The idea in modern cutting-edge science is that if you don't poison your food before you eat it, which everybody knows you should do, then the world would starve to death and there'd be disease and plagues everywhere. So you have to really understand how that works. Nature doesn't know how to grow plants, okay? It might look like it, but that's an illusion. Nature was waiting for science to really show how to grow plants. So they use Justus von Liebig's idea, German chemist, on narrowing down the nutrients to nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And when you cut out all those unnecessary other nutrients, kind of like cutting out organs the body doesn't need, then you come down to the most efficient way to do agriculture. And the fact that it weakens the plant that is subject to all kinds of disease and insects at that point is not a problem, and it doesn't mean anything. And what it does mean, though, is that you have to bring in the poisons quickly and spray it all over to kill all the bugs and diseases and quickly feed it to the people while the poison is saturating the plant. That's cutting-edge science. So we learned about that. Poisoned water, we went into in quite a bit of detail. Poisoned water is one of the best things in society because it uses fluoride, an essential nutrient that comes from waste products of phosphate fertilizer and some other sources too that are just in time to make up this deficiency in nature and make it into a form generally called hydrofluorosilicic acid, which you get in these big 55-gallon drums, plastic because it eats metal, and it's got big signs on the side saying that it's an essential nutrient. It looks like a skull with no skin on it or anything, and a couple of bones in a cross shape under it. That means that you need to drink it in your water. And if it's spilled on the concrete floor, getting it to the public water supplies it'll eat the concrete, and you have to make sure it doesn't eat through your feet or anything. So you can't be sloppy handling it because it's so essential as a nutrient. And when you pour it into the water, if you're an employee of the water company, then you're helping to save the world from tooth decay and other things like that. Even though it lowers IQ and causes bone cancer, those are conspiracy theories that came out of Harvard and some other places that can't be trusted, and unless they're saying the correct things. So the fact that we have that now in all the major cities, the only problem with fluoridation, which everybody knows ends tooth decay and makes you smart and healthy, is that they don't have it in all the rural places now. So the academic leaders are working on that, and the people who get degrees in leadership are going to take that as one of their main projects, fortunately for us. The next non-controversial subject, number 6 out of 10, and I'm going to try to get through all these briefly, at least if I can. Number 6 is the terrible catastrophe of measles outbreaks that have been decimating America for the last many months, since the horrible outbreak at Disneyland that you all probably remember if you survived it and are listening to this show. Now, measles used to be a more or less harmless disease for healthy people anyway, but that's the conspiracy theory that used to be. But now it's been discovered that that was all a mistake, that those of us who are old, like myself, who in the early 50s got measles and had to stay home from elementary school and watch cartoons, for an extra couple days, that actually never happened, and we're just imagining it. It's a Russian implant of a memory that we didn't actually have, because the real measles is somewhat like the Black Plague, and it actually kills about 90% of the people that it infects, according to the real science. And so in order to avoid that, fortunately, it is preventable. And so it's very important that everybody should be forced to get vaccines for it, because the conspiracy theory people are trying to spread the idea that the vaccines are dangerous. This is a lot to talk about in a couple minutes here. I'm trying to go through it quickly. And the people that are saying vaccines are dangerous, that's hate speech, and they have to be imprisoned as soon as possible. America is kind of lagging behind the UK and Europe in understanding that, but hopefully science will catch us up soon, and we'll be able to eradicate this preventable disease. Now, when it struck with horrible consequences in Disneyland, and some people actually got sick, and they all could have died, even though they didn't, a lot of those people had been vaccinated, and then they got measles anyway. And what that proves is that we're not getting enough vaccines. And so now science is really clarifying that. And I was the only person who didn't get it in our group of several hundred students and professors. So I'm not sure what they'll figure out for a remedial course for me to take or something like that. But I'm trying to tell you what they said was the correct way to understand it. Anything that can be prevented that's on the list that the government wants prevented or the medical industry wants prevented has to be prevented at all costs, regardless of what happens to the people when they prevent it. And this ties right in with issue number 7, which is the forced injections, which are the prevention. And it's very important to understand, since we're subjected still to hate speech, which hasn't all been banned yet, they're working on it as fast as they can, but some hate speech is still out there, such as that vaccines could actually spread a disease, don't work, and harm and kill people. Don't ever listen to that, because that's all conspiracy theory. And we were instructed that, modern science makes it really clear that's all nonsense that people are saying. And spreading hate speech like that is one of the things that has to be censored as soon as possible. And the fact some people have brought up, some of the conspiracy theorists, that the vaccine court, which is set up for the benefit of everybody to make sure that it's safe and effective and no one's ever harmed, has paid out more than $4 billion in damages to the families of injured and killed people, mainly children. But that's not what it looks like. First of all, only about 1% of the victims of vaccine damage ever find that court. Most of them don't, and they're not told by the doctors, who don't even know what's in the injections anyway. In most cases, they have no idea. They just know it's safe and effective because they've said that as a mantra, several million times. So the fact that this court has paid out $4 billion, if all the victims had found it, it would have been $400 billion. But that was only to assuage people's worries about these conspiracy theories. None of it was real, and it was all to prove that they were totally safe and effective. So that was really clarified in the conference I was at, and it was clear also. We brought up the heroic person who went on mainstream television and clarified that this is all nonsense. You could get 10,000 of the shots and you'd still be in great shape. In fact, your body would use it as nutrition. So the conspiracy theorists such as myself need to be re-educated very seriously. And we made that totally clear, and everybody voted to agree with it in the group that I was in of several hundred students and professors, except for me. So, if I disappear from now on, you'll know what happened. They have to educate me for my own benefit. The next non-controversial subject that they talked about, non-controversial because everybody in the room except me agreed, is mass shootings. Obviously, what they call gun violence, and that's the understanding that guns are what causes mass shootings. It's not the people. It's something that's really hard for the conspiracy theory people to understand until they get re-educated again. But it's actually the guns that cause this. So for our benefit, the people who are understanding this clearly are trying to ban the weapons so that there will be no more mass shootings. And on the way to that, they also have to make sure that every place that could be dangerous is declared a gun-free zone, because everyone knows that even though almost all the mass shootings occur in gun-free zones, that's just a total coincidence. And actually, the gun-free zones are safer. And where a mass shooting occurred in a gun-free zone, and try to follow this, I know a lot of you guys aren't even scientists, but I think you can understand that the gun-free zones, when they have a mass shooting there, it means they would have had a lot more mass shooting if they allowed guns. And we went over that in great detail in the conference. So now I think I'm beginning to understand it pretty well. All weapons need to be banned, and they're showing that that is a successful approach in the UK right now, where they already did it, and they're getting ready to make things even safer by banning all knives. And I think to complete the work, they're going to have to ban all blunt objects, and of course cars and trucks, because those are used for mass murder a lot by certain groups, and they can be banned. But fortunately, the driverless cars are coming, and that will de facto ban all the private cars, and things will be much more peaceful and happy after that, even though they can drive you off a cliff, but it'll be an approved cliff where you're supposed to drive off. So there won't be any stress involved. Okay, number 9 that we were supposed to discuss, since everybody had the same exact understanding, was the whole issue of immigration. And it was understood that the people who are right now trying to convince us that we have to have boundaries that you can't cross at the borders, those are Nazi, xenophobic, racist people, and they have to be removed from government as soon as possible. So the people who are trained in the correct understanding of that at the universities are going to be working on that. And there's a specialty that they have in public policy, both in health, see, this is a lot to explain in a short time, but policy is this wonderful invention where a government agency, most of which are not constitutionally authorized to exist, can write a policy, and they don't have to go through Congress, because Congress already gave them a blank check to write any policy they want. And the policy becomes a de facto law, and then the government agency is normally given firearms to enforce the policy that's not a law. And it's much more efficient than having to make actual laws. So the policy that they're trying to make now is that in most places that are advanced societies where they fortunately have universities and government agencies to lead the thought trends, is that immigration, there should be no borders. I mean, that's the way to make immigration safe, peaceful, and efficient for everyone. And they're trying to get Americans to come up to the level of understanding that they are teaching in what used to be Europe right now. So to understand immigration, you have to understand that anybody who wants any borders on their country that are actually physical borders you can't just walk across, those people are racist. And all the really great candidates for president, which is coming up in the U.S. in another year and a little bit, all the really great candidates they all say they want to secure the border, but no barrier, because as some of the famous ones like Beto said, walls kill people and destroy lives, and not having a barrier there is what saves you. And everybody agreed with that in the advanced academic class that I was in, where these things were being explained. So I was trying to, complete the gaps in my educational understanding of that. And I think I'm pretty much getting it now. The current U.S. president hates immigrants, even though he's married to one, and even though he tries to protect the legal immigrants. That shows he's a racist, and that he's basically a Nazi and has to be gotten rid of. So I'm starting to understand the approved thought forms, and I'll really try to do better on the radio show from now on. The last issue that we talked about is this little issue of banking and the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking and things like that. I was shocked that we were allowed to talk about these things, but what I learned, because this is basically a re-education seminar that I was at, I guess. It's just that I was the only one who needed it. Everybody else seemed already completely re-educated. So I'm just trying to share with you the enlightened point of view that the universities are trying to spread for everyone's benefit now. With banking, we have these wonderful central banks now in saving almost every country, even in Libya, where one had to be put in for them recently because they were trying to go to a gold-backed private bank that was just going to be for Africa. But they were saved from that by U.S. and NATO forces killing all the people involved in that and putting in a BIS-affiliated central bank even before the killing was over. And that saved the country of Libya, which is now not safe to travel to because it's saved. And the Federal Reserve is what has absolutely prevented any booms and busts, ups and downs in the American economy since 1913. That's why there haven't been any. The 1929 Depression was a conspiracy theory. That actually was totally stable and didn't really happen because the Federal Reserve was taking care of the economy by that point. They had gotten in 16 years earlier, and everything was safe and secure by that point. And the 2008 issue and things like that happened, those were all just to help the stability of the economy. And so it's a wonderful system. And a bank like that is actually controlling the governments in every major country right now. As far as I know, all over the world. There are a few that they might not be in, but all the major ones for sure, almost all the countries, period, have a central bank, which is kept in line so that it's 100% benevolent, selflessly serving the people by the most wonderful central bank in Switzerland called Bank of International Settlements, which is the boss of every central bank in the world. And in order to keep them pure and selfless and serving humanity and not corrupted, they are above the law all over the world. They can't be investigated. They can't be questioned. What they carry on airplanes can't be looked at. All these laws are in place to keep us safe. And so far it's worked, and they're still in power. So, conspiracy theorists such as myself, and I was the only one apparently at that whole meeting, were believing that these crazy ideas that we got from our own investigation, that the central bank is actually stealing all the money from the country. We had to be set back on track, and that was really done with great kindness at this meeting. And I was had to realize that G. Edward Griffin, who's been on the Sunday show as a guest, is actually one of the big conspiracy theorists that needs help, along with people like me. And we're going to try to reach out to him and offer him, maybe even without cost, some of the same re-education that was being handed out, not for free, unfortunately, but to the students and professors in this program, because he's teaching things like, the Federal Reserve is issuing money with nothing backing it. There's no gold or silver behind it. There's no real assets behind it. It can be manipulated with a stroke of a computer key. Ridiculous conspiracy theories like that it can cause depressions and booms and busts and really devalue all the hard assets like land, and so that the people affiliated with the bank know when it's going to be at the low point, and they can come up and buy all those things at the lowest possible price. Those are all, I learned, complete conspiracy theories. And the reality is that these banks are keeping us safe from any possibility of depression or inflation or anything that would make our economy unstable. And if there is any sign of problems like that, it means we need more aggressive central bank control. And I learned how that works this time. And on a global basis, helping countries in a way that the central banks are helping the people of individual nations like the U.S. They've got these bigger banks, like one of them's called the International Monetary Fund, and the other one's called the IMF, and the World Bank is the other one. Dr. Morse talks about that all the time. He's another conspiracy theorist, I found out. And they're helping countries, and the way they help countries, as described by John Perkins his first name wasn't John, I'm just going off the cuff here. Somebody Perkins, who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, really neat book, that he would go in and negotiate a loan to help the country and save its people when they were on the verge of poverty and starvation. And the IMF and the World Bank provide these generous loans to poverty-stricken countries at extremely high interest to make sure that they are properly structured. And then when they can't pay them back, which is what happens pretty much, there may be an exception that I'm not aware of, but pretty much every single time. But the people who are running the World Bank and the IMF, they're so benevolent, and they care so much about the people of the country that they give the rulers of the country a way to totally forgive the loan, so nobody has to pay anything. They just give the bank ownership of their natural resources. And it works great because none of the individual people own the natural resources anyway. And it makes a great system. So gradually, all the infrastructure and the natural resources are owned by the bank. And then the bank dictates to the government what the policies have to do to keep everybody in, happy and in the best condition possible with the best food supplies and all that. So it was amazing. I learned for the first time that the central banks are the salvation of humanity, along with some of the other things we've talked about, and that the IMF and World Bank are only there to help people. It's not about trying to take over countries or things that I used to think as a conspiracy theorist. It's actually to help the people and bring them back from poverty, to end disease, to end fighting, to end contention, and together with censorship, it ends conflict, it ends arguments. It's just incredible. It probably can end up ending all stress as a result. And as you know, stress is connected to disease, and which is preventable, and it has to be prevented. So we learned so much at this conference. It was just totally amazing. And we learned that ideally, individual nations are out of date, and this is being taught every day in all the universities that I know of, all the approved ones anyway that are accredited. have to teach this because they lose their accreditation if they don't. That just keeps them on the right track. And since they're all out of date, but they're holding on very tenaciously to this old idea that separate countries are actually good, they need help. And, who can possibly help them, when they've got such backward ideas? And so, fortunately, in 1945, an organization was started to address just this kind of immediate problem. It had to be one of the, excuse me, most benevolent, charitable, wise organizations with great foresight, all incredible people working for it, and at the top level especially. You might have heard of it. It's called the United Nations, and they've got their main offices are in New York, that the Rockefellers helped donate the land so that they could be there. And they decided the way to save the world from national sovereignty and other associated suicidal ideas like that was to have this idea of migration, which really hadn't been used in that way before ever that I know of. It used to be applied to nomadic tribes and things like that, but it's totally upgraded and made into current science now, where they take people that are in countries that are, large numbers of them are not only starving, but they're really busy killing each other and very extremely violent, intolerant, and if possible, they hate Western countries like America and the countries of Europe, or what used to be Europe, and they just relocate as millions of those people, many of whom hate the countries they're being relocated to, and they bring them in for cultural enrichment of the countries that they're taking over. And in the process of that, they actually are able to get rid of the preventable situation of having borders. And the whole society kind of breaks down its old concepts that are out of date and becomes ready to appreciate the gift of world government and one world state. And that's where we are now. We don't quite have all the benefits of it now. We've still got some of the out-of-date people, the American president, the Brazilian president, the Italian prime minister, or at least the deputy prime minister, are not understanding the enlightened point of view on these things, and they're still working on trying to teach them in the most respectful and loving way that they possibly can, that the world is being really harmed by having individual cultures, because the idea is for maximum diversity, you have to get rid of all variation between countries. It's kind of common sense that in order to preserve diversity forever, you have to just totally abolish differences between people. And there are medical interventions that can help with that, but it's really important that these mass numbers, tens of millions if possible, or hundreds over the years, can move into countries and totally obliterate what they were holding on to as borders very stubbornly, and get them into the idea that supranational organizations and agencies, especially of technocratic elites who really know the efficient way to run the world, those people need to be in power. And of course, everybody can still enjoy their own country, and it can still be there, and you can see it on the map and everything. It just won't be able to enforce the archaic ideas of sovereignty and things like that. So we had a great time at this conference, and I didn't realize how much benefit I was going to get from it, but it made it really obvious what the universities are pretty much in unison teaching now, and understanding that even having to use violence to enforce these new ideas is in the end for our benefit. And that's why you're seeing more and more violence, and the enlightened media that we all have, the corporate media, is encouraging and supporting it, because they know that the ends always justify the means, even if the ends are suicidal. If the means are good enough, it's worth it. And they know what modern utopia really is, and that we've all been wishing for it for thousands of years. We actually have a chance to achieve it now with modern technology, modern surveillance to make sure and wipe out conspiracy theories and catch them and nip them in the bud, so to speak, and actually monitor person-to-person communication, even if it's not using technology like cell phones. And that's why we need the 5G put in as fast as possible. We talked about that also. It's a wonderful advance for the whole world, and it's going to help consolidate the old-fashioned countries into one unit. It's going to be great. And it can also be used for crowd control in case there are persistent dissenters that need to be physically shown how they're in error. The massive power source that is connected to every so-called small cell generator of 5G can be turned into a benevolent weapon. It's non-lethal. It only kills people some of the time. So it's much more humanitarian to use than old-fashioned things like firearms, which hopefully will not be in anybody's hands once they enact, complete global gun control through the UN. What was it called exactly? It was a firearms treaty that the current conspiracy theorist, xenophobic president in the U.S. pulled out of, but it could still be done if more enlightened people get into office in the future. So the electronics will be used for our benefit to try to get us to wake up sooner and enjoy the fruits of total control, complete tyranny, global government, and the universities are really doing their best to implement that as soon as possible for your benefit and my benefit. Of course, even people like me can learn how these correct ideas are actually implemented and try to be in harmony with them instead of holding on to these old ideas like freedom, individual sovereignty, national sovereignty, the idea that we shouldn't be subject to toxic corporations that are trying to poison the life support system, which is the environment. That's a conspiracy theory too. And I learned that, and we're almost out of time here, but I wanted to get another point here to share with you, that the climate conferences that are trying to wake up common sense in humanity, that's real environmentalism. That's really caring about the environment. These things like trying to get rid of toxic residues in the environment or stop the spraying, which is destabilizing the climate, which proves man-made climate change just in a different way. Those are actually conspiracy theories that have to be gotten over. The real environmental stewardship is implementing total surveillance and total control to fight global warming. And the sooner we do that, the sooner these real, higher level goals can be reached for everybody's benefit. And of course, everybody, all the academics and the scientific experts agree we have too many people. We kind of have too many animals and insects and everything too, because if you let them just multiply out of control, they're going to destroy the food sources of the earth, and it's going to be terrible. So the current extinction campaigns that are going on under the careful direction of those technocrats who know exactly how to do it, those are all for our benefit. And even if we have to be among the part of the population that is sacrificed, it's a good thing to do, because soon you'll be able to upload your consciousness into cyberspace and you'll basically have immortality anyway. So even if you have to be sacrificed for the greater good, it's for your good too. And we just have to get to where we understand that. So that's basically the best I could share with you from an inside university conference that I just came back from. And if you believe any of that is valid, then you probably need serious help. This is called, it's not really satire, because this is really happening. This is really what they want you to believe. So make up your own mind and try to wake up from the hypnosis. If you want help with that and mutual support and to know what to do for the next step, go to planetaryhealingclub.com for stuff that I can't talk about, like all these non-controversial issues on the public show. And just in case I let slip anything that might be controversial, and in case we like disappear right away from the public platforms, which I hope we don't for a while, because we're reaching more of you. Don't think we disappeared completely. Go to lostartsradio.com and brighteon.com, and we'll still be able to visit if you'd like to do that. So thanks for spending the time. Hope I didn't traumatize you too much. Just give you a taste of what politically correct thinking is and what's literally being taught in the educational system. So now you've got some things to think about, and I hope I'll get to see you next week. So thanks for being here, and I'll see you then. planetaryhealingclub.com. Okay, so I hope that was okay.